Hey, if you're watching this, then you have joined LaFASA's book club, and we are going to be discussing Grabbed. And I hope you have your copy. This is going to be reversed, but but we have Caridad Moro, who is was a part of bringing this book to life. And so, tell us a little bit about how that happened.
It was right after the 2016 presidential election, and a bunch of poets and writers were at the Miami Book Fair, and we were sitting in the green room, and we were just despondent, and we couldn't understand how a grabber in chief had been elected, how someone who had put forth, truly guys of who he was, that didn't matter. So we truly were despondent. There were tears, there were all sorts of feelings. And then we had to get up and walk over to go see Rita Dove, who was about to read and close out the festival. So on the walk over, I'm just thinking, my friends are upset. So I stop and I say to Nikki Mustaki, one of the editors, we should really put an anthology together and call it Grabbed. And then our other editor, Elisa, who was next to me, said, that's a great idea. I don't know a woman among us who hasn't been in some way, either mentally, emotionally, or physically, grabbed. And that was the little seed. And from there, we just kept talking about it. We came up with a dream list of who we would love to have in the book. And at first, that was a little slow going because, we were basically cold calling people to submit work to us. And then there was a turning point in that where Richard Blanco, who was Obama's inaugural poet, who's a dear friend of ours, we all went to FIU, Florida International University. So all four editors were very good friends. So Richard came over and we were picking his brain, what should we do? How do we reach people? And he said, when I came out of the closet and I went to a gay bar, I realized what it was like to be a woman in the world because all of a sudden I was being touched, I was being fondled, whether I liked it or not, whether I gave consent or not. But just the mere fact that I was a gay man meant you could put your hands on me. And I really understood what it was like to walk around like that for you all the time. So that created a paradigm shift, right? And we opened up the call and the inclusivity of the book because I realized, I had never thought of it that way. I had never framed it that way. So then the project took on a whole other life. Adding Richard to our letter really helped open doors for us. And the work started to come in. And as you saw in the book, really great, stellar, just amazing work. And we have everyone from a college student to a 75-year-old retiree. And in most cases, these were stories that had never been unearthed, that had never been told. In fact, this is the first anthology of its kind regarding this theme. It's never been done before, which is shocking considering how pervasive it is in our society. But I think the Me Too movement, of course, was a precursor to this. And, the irony is, as I said, we started working on it in 2016. It was published in 2020. My fellow editors and I were always a little worried, what if we missed the zeitgeist of the moment? What if, it was all of a sudden passe, which now makes me laugh with, no short amount of irony, because unfortunately it will never be passe. It is always happening. It is pervasive. And that really was the goal of the book, ultimately, to bring it into the conversation, to continue talking about it, not just through the lens of the celebrity, because I think that Me Too was kind of co-opted with the coverage we were seeing were of kind of like untouchables, right? People who don't live in the everyday realm. Whereas this book extended that lens to everyone, from children to schools, institutions, places where everyday people are, not just the glitterati, the Harry Weinsteins of the world. We were looking at, the PE coaches of the world. We were looking at the the predators that walk amongst us, which I think had a lot of power in its ability to speak to a wider audience and ultimately, hopefully, bring healing and catharsis.
Wow, that's a great beginning. I mean, just showing, showing the broad scale, and that's what I noticed in the book too, is just the broad scale. Everybody is represented in that book, regardless of their age. We have a lot of young people in there. We have older people, people of different races, sexual orientations, and things. So yeah, I think you very well represented everybody, every person, and not just the celebrity aspect or anything of that nature. It's everybody.
Unfortunately, it's everybody.
And I really appreciated, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I appreciated similarly that it's diverse not only in the people who are talking, but also the experiences. As you said, this is every person you meet for the most part has been grabbed, whether it's, a very physical, violent assault or experiencing street harassment, experiencing sexism in the workplace. And I really liked how those things were not separated out in the book, and it didn't feel like it was framed as this one's worse than the other. And that's something as a movement we talk about so much. We talk about the spectrum of sexual violence and how sometimes people will be like, okay, well, that one's not that bad. Street harassment isn't that bad. And I think this book did a great job of showing in a very subtle way. It was not beating you over the head with it, that like, no, these issues are so interrelated and you kind of, you can't have one without the other. In terms of all these behaviors. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We didn't in any way, like, as you said, we want to put it in order of atrocity. And also because the idea, what you said actually makes me think that every person experiences trauma in their way, and the person's trauma is the biggest trauma, right? Like, I don't think anybody can say what another person is feeling or their experience. We connect with them because of what we find in ourselves. So I love that it's like this melange, right? Because everything, there's a spillover into all of it. And in that spillover, I see connection. Not just as, victims, because some of these pieces are very strong. Some of these pieces are not coming with a voice of victimization, but as human beings who are more than what happened to them, who have taken this experience to commune, to find catharsis, to empower themselves. This actually putting this together and writing the pieces that I wrote for Grabbed has opened up this whole other creative realm for me, places that I might not have gone to before. And if you knew my work, I'm pretty open. I don't shy away from things, but even in my bravado, there were things I wasn't ready to unearth. But now, in the bravery and in the voices of all of the contributors of this book, I found new permission, for lack of a better word. And it's funny how you said worse, which one is worse. My new poem is called As to Your Comment That It Could Have Been Worse, addressing that issue about, it could have been worse. Well, really? Worse than what? Exactly. So, yeah. Okay, so I thought I'd read a couple of pieces from the book. I'm gonna start with the first book in the poem, which is by Frisia McKee, and we just absolutely loved this. It's What We Did This Year. I counted up the poems I'd written about violence against women, though I knew the number is ever growing. On the bus, a cry moved through me like water. I remembered the male writer who sent me a picture of a naked stranger. "Do you think she's all right?" he asked, claiming the woman posing was our mutual friend. I remembered when I learned a woman's body could be used against her. I remembered relearning what I had learned and learned. I remembered how it felt all the times my friends told me they thought I hated men. If I was honest, I would have told you there were women I hated. I wanted to be right and I wanted to be wrong. I was no longer surprised when I didn't feel anything. I wanted to stop writing. The man's hairy arm pressed up against me on the bus as he slept, and I read an account and I read another. I took a drink of water and I took another. Some men lost their jobs, but not their investments. Some people said, "I'm ready to listen." How unready was I to hear it, wondering where we'd been for each other every day of our lives. When we were putting together the book, and that was an ornery process, ordering all the work. How were we going to put it together? Um, were we just going to throw it against the wall and see where it landed? Um, yeah, there's a joke that if you want to put something in order, especially for poetry, throw it down a flight of stairs, and however it lands, you got yourself a book. But we actually talked a lot about it, and this one was never anything but the first poem in the book. I think it kind of captures this idea, this narrative, and it's kind of haunting and takes us into, what it is you were doing at that time. It was also very rooted in the time of Trump. So, there's a shift. And I think in a few years, we'll see a lot of writing coming out about that shift and the idea of a national consciousness that was okay with violence against women, against children, against uh, the marginalized, the just everybody, right? To me, that poem really frames that. Oh, when I read that, I'm going to remember the time then. If that makes
I
sense.
agree with that. I mean, it kind of frames what is actually what's going on, what's actually happening. You know, everybody can relate.
So how long do I have in terms of, because I'm trying to decide, should I read just poems? I was going to read my short story. So we have time for that, yes?
We should have done that. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do that one next, which is a story too old for that now. This, like all of the prose pieces, they're all nonfiction. So, and this is a story that I never told anyone. So, too old for that now. My father is a mercurial man, known for dark, brooding silences and peaks of rage, but also deep belly laughs, a resting charm, and an affectionate physicality with his children. Throughout my childhood, he has jostled me on his shoulders, whinnied like a horse as I clung to his back, cradled me quietly on his lap in the flicker of prime-time television before carrying me to my room and tucking me in for the night. I love him. I live for those moments. In search of them, I have learned to gauge his mood, to read the electricity in the air around him, to discern when to approach, when to make myself scarce. I am very good at it. One night, I deem him mellow and amenable, and I begin to scramble onto his lap in order to settle in and watch the Waltons, when he pushes me away with the palms of his hands, raises his voice, and says, "Stop. You're too old for that now." I am 11. I want to ask why, but the air has been sucked out of my lungs as if I've been punched in the gut, my throat obstructed by a fist of tears, so I say nothing. Frantically, I run through the laundry list of things I could have done to bring on this level of rejection. Had I uttered a smart remark, forgotten to wash the dishes, fought with my brother, played, laughed, breathed too loud? I can think of nothing I have done that would warrant the upending of such a tangible expression of his love. I do not know what I've done, but I understand that the answer lies in the fact that he won't look at me after he says it, that he busies his hands with his lighter, his pack of camel shorts, that he stares at the TV screen as I stare at the side of his face and wait for him to explain. I know, too, that his reaction has something to do with the reason why some boys at school have begun to save seats for my friend Gina and me at their lunch tables, why they follow us to class and snap our newly acquired bras when the adults aren't looking, why those same boys, when choosing sides for volleyball, have begun to evaluate the girls using a new rubric they call the cup and jiggle meter, which explains why Gina and I are suddenly their first draft picks, even though I am not particularly athletic and have never ever managed to see a set through to completion. It is the same reason why the salesperson at the ladies' intimates department on the second floor of Jordan Marsh whispers to my mother that perhaps I had skipped the training bra stage, handing me an A cup to try on while propelling me into powder pink dressing room where my mother watches from a tufted chaise. It dawns on me then what I've done to deserve his rejection. I like it. I like the attention, like the way it feels to be seen, to be noticed, like the feel of my new breasts, like how my body looks in the mirror, like to cup them in the shower, like how they fill out my new peach and white bathing suit my mother let me buy on the trip to Jordan Marsh in the junior section, a vast improvement from the ruffled assortment of suits in the girls' department. Like how the suit with its peephole halter top holds my blooming flesh together beautifully. That I have dared to love my new curves this much makes me almost sick with shame, but it doesn't stop me from pulling on that very bathing suit 2 weeks later for a pool party at my best friend Ariana's house down the block. Our fathers play poker and dominoes together, and our mothers exchange sewing patterns and recipes. So I am allowed to come and go to her house, the hub for all the kids on our block, with relative freedom, as long as my brother is with me. When we get there, the pool is thick with kids and assorted adults who have been roped into endless games of Marco Polo and chicken fight matches. Adi sits perched on her father's shoulders and challenges me to a match. I am happy when her father's friend, known to me simply and affectionately as Poppy, calls me over and offers to serve as my base. I swim over to him, ready to do battle. I place my hands on his shoulders and prepare to lift myself onto his neck, but instead of squatting into the water so that I can propel myself up, he turns his body slightly and maneuvers his hand between my legs and strokes me, surely, deftly, purposely, under the guise of helping me up. I have never been touched in this way, but there is no mistaking the intention behind his caress. It is no accident, no poorly timed collision between us. No, his move is deliberate, and when I look up into his face, his smile backs up what my body knows. He did this on purpose. He liked it. I kick my legs as hard as I can and propel my body away from his. Come on, yells Adi. What are you waiting for? I want to scream, tell everybody in that pool what he did, but instead I stay silent and begin to hate her for the danger she put me in from the safety of her father's arms. I duck underwater so the tears leaking from my eyes go unnoticed. I feign a cramp and practically run up the pool steps and out of the water. I sit away from the rest of the party, shivering in the sun for so long that her mother approaches me and asks me if I'm all right. She is a kind woman, a woman who has fed me and cared for me during the many hours I have spent in her home, but I don't tell her what has happened. I don't think to warn her against a man who has easy proximity to her 3 daughters. I don't tell her because my boobs look big in my bathing suit, and based on that, I know she won't believe me. Instead, I tell her I don't feel well. She confirms I look very pale and offers to drive me the half block it takes to get home. I decline her offer politely, grab my brother, and walk home. When we come to the door, my father is doing yard work and my mother is cooking dinner. She calls from the kitchen, surprised we are back so soon, but neither of them see me come in. It's Scotty's fault, my brother says. She feels sick, and I nod, because yes, 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 it is my fault. I take to my bed, blanketed in shame once again, but the shame has changed. It's weightier now, heavy with the knowing that I had brought on the violation with my breast-fueled glee, my whorish vanity, my desire to be seen. Surely that's why he had chosen me, because somehow he knew I deserved it. I spend the rest of that afternoon in feverish starts and stops of sleep. I skip dinner and only emerge from my bedroom when my mother insists I join the rest of the family on the couch. Love boat is on, she trills, oblivious. When I approach the couch, my father looks at me for a beat too long, and I'm sure he can see the defilement on me. Yet something about the look on my face tugs on his heart, for he does what he rarely does, reverses himself, holds out his arms and says, Ven, mi niña, come sit with your old man. You don't look so good. The fist in my throat returns because I finally understand why he had pushed me away. I understand that he'd been trying to warn me away from the lapse of men because the changes in my body made me bait for the taking, because lapse in hands and the desires of men were dangerous, even if that lap was his. The television screen doubles and triples in my vision when I finally respond to his request, my eyes forward, face turned away from him. No, Pop, I say. I'm too old for that now. Thank you. So, did we lose Kelly?
I'm here.
Oh.
I just took my webcam off so that nobody would be freezing. I think it helped a little bit.
So thank you for indulging that reading. And every time I read it, I feel differently about it. And I feel that that girl's she's getting a shout out now.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Are we?
Yeah.
Can we comment? Is that?
Huh?
I don't know if we're kind of like commenting, but I just wanted to say that I really appreciated that story so much, and that's one that's like really stuck with me. And I think all of the ones that were in the book that were really about kind of that time, that like adolescent phase, that has been like so much on my mind after reading specifically that story and also this book. And yeah, kind of that moment of girlhood where you realize I am not safe. And I think for some people it's, that one instance, and so for some people it's a slower, kind of more gradual experience, but I've been like very thoughtful about that moment. I think this story really beautifully articulated a lot of things that we don't talk about. I don't think we get a lot of stories about girls' experiences in a serious way. So I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's like a really relatable experience. Like you're saying, it's just like, it's the tough truth and reality that we live in, that all of a sudden we just turn into a piece of meat. And like, I just felt like I was having a flashback the entire time you're just like reading that. Like, I was just like, it's very uncannily relatable to a lot of us.
I'm a high school teacher in my spare time. And just yesterday, we were having a discussion, and one of my students said, when does it become a crime to be a girl? And it happens somewhere along the time when we're not allowed to go topless on the beach anymore. And that like struck me, because
Right.
it's true. We allow little girls to what? 3, 2, 3, you're pushing it at 4 to let a little girl run around without a top. But just her question, when does it stop being okay to be a girl? It just pierced me, and it speaks to what you're saying, and that, that realization, the adolescent, I'm not safe. To quote Alice Walker, a woman never made me afraid to walk the streets at night. And it's that understanding that, oh, there's an us and there's a them.
Yeah.
That's sad.
I think
Wow.
also that feeling,
Student to
I'm sorry,
recognize.
can you say that again?
Oh, I said that was very astute of your student to recognize that.
Yeah, as a literature teacher, again, why I did this book. Literature just opens you up to all sorts of questions and ideas, and takes you tangents, and I teach dual enrollment, so I get to teach intro to lit. So I have a lot of latitude in what we read, and we were reading a story by Joyce Carol Oates. It's called "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" And it's basically, and if you haven't read it, it's harrowing, it's wonderful, and it's basically a modern day Little Red Riding Hood. Parents go away and the wolf comes to the door. And so this idea of a young, and she's 15. So, this idea of that adolescent crossing over into another realm is very, and that's, it's interesting you say that's not taken seriously, because it's usually usurped, right? And it's made a mockery of, and it's like, we, the girls are always ugly and having to deal, and they have the pretty friend who teaches them how to come into the world and be the woman they're meant to be, right? It's just co-opting our old story. So maybe we should write a movie about that. And that's going to take me to another poem that I kind of love for its repetition, and also for the seriousness of what it implies. And that's Me Too by Nicole Callahan. Me too, said she. Me too, said me. And I, said she. And me, said me. Me too, me too. A cock, a shoe. Me too, in red and blue. Me too, the cue, the do. Me too, said she. Me too, said me. And me, and me, and me, and me, and me, and me, and me too. And although that's kind of jokey, it's also heartbreaking.
Well, yeah, no. I mean,
Because
that's the volumes, just the way it's written.
And it's like a nursery rhyme, right?
yeah, it's like Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, which is like that. It's a double whammy.
To make it sexual assault. Like,
Oh, I think we got a lag. Could you say that again, Samantha?
when I said Brittany like took the words out of my mouth, I said the whole time I was thinking, I was like, Dr. Seuss would make it sexual assault.
Right. So, I love that. Now, do you guys have any questions? Did you want to talk about anything specific in the book or anything at all?
As I read through the book, I kept trying to pick out something that was might be my favorite. And every time I read further, I'm like, oh no, I like this one. Oh no, I like this one. Oh, I like this one. I couldn't figure, nothing. Everything was so well, and just so different, and people took so much literary license to just make the poems or stories their own. The way they wrote, they didn't really follow any rules. They just made it the shape of what they wanted it to be. And so there's so many aspects of every single writing in there. I mean, it was just such a good representation of how vast people's experiences are, not just in the stories displayed that's being written, but in how it's being written. Just I was really I was grabbed myself just in the magnitude of how great these these survivors did with their writing.
And that's kind of what, I made a list of like all the ways to use grabbed, right? So, grab your attention, grab you by the heartstrings.
Yeah.
So we wanted to subvert that also, like call attention to it, but also we
Yeah.
want to grab you so that you understand that
Yeah.
all this other grabbing is happening, right? So, and each reading has been so cathartic, and because we've done a lot of different readings, and we have so many contributors that we have yet to double up on any of them, because we want everybody to have a voice. So every reading has been a different reading because it's different people, but every reading has been so cathartic and so healing, for the audience and for the contributors. To be able to find a space to land, and knowing that whatever they're talking about is going to be honored in that space. And it's the same for our audience members. We've gotten emails. One particular one comes to mind, and she lives in Egypt. She was a victim of genital mutilation, and reached out because she had been moved to write poetry based on reading Grat. Now, how it got to Egypt, how it got to her, that's, I believe, the universe working in a magical way, because that led her to some sort of catharsis that we can't even fathom. And that's the goal. That's what kept me going when we were like, this is not going to happen. It just kept me going because I thought, no, there is a place for this in the world. And this has the power to do a lot of good in the world, and not just now, flash in the pan, but like always. We want it taught at universities. We want it taught in high schools. We want it understood that we hear you, we see you, we are you. So that's really, and one of my favorite parts of this is that there are men in here, and not just gay men. There are straight men talking about this. And I loved that. One of my favorite pieces is one by Virgil Suarez. And that's the one with the lion on the belt, and it's the boy working in the storeroom, and the macho Cuban man like violates him in the storeroom, or attempts to, grabs him. And I'm Cuban. And for a Cuban man to make that admission on paper, and he's a straight guy, super Cuban guy with the tobacco and the coffee, like your prototypical Cuban guy, other than the fact that he's a poet, was stunning to me, and meant so much to me, to be able to make himself vulnerable against every acculturation, every idea of what he grew up with, of what men said, what men did. Well, to the point that he told me, well, my father died. He never knew that story. So that also was very moving to me. I admit to not really caring so much about the male narrative anymore. Like, I'm an English major. I've read enough, male narratives in my lifetime. But when they're framed like this, in a wholly unexpected way, I find there's a lot of value in that, because that also sets up a precedent, right? Like, oh, okay, maybe some other Cuban kid who's not as evolved in his thinking picks that up and thinks, oh, that happened to me, and this guy can say it, so maybe I can say it. So there's a lot of value in that.
No, and I was gonna say, Kari, like that's really important. Can y'all hear me fine? Oh, like that's just really important, and I appreciated how diverse and how like you just showed the reality of like how many parts of the world that like this problem touches, and how you represented in its actuality. Because like you're saying, I am Afro Latina too. So I know my mom came to the States when she was 34. So I grew up even though I'm American, I grew up in a completely other different culture. You know exactly how that is. And I think
I know exactly how that is. Yes.
it's very important to like put into context how other people's experiences from different cultures are just so important too, because like you're saying, that story.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
I think this book made me really think about, I did my grad student kind of whatever thesis project on writing and sexual assaults and doing like basically therapeutic writing. So I think I've always been really curious about the connection between sexual assault, which is such an embodied experience, such a physical experience, and an experience that so many people have trouble naming and putting words on. And yet I feel like our culture really forces us to put words on it. Yes means yes. No means no. Telling your story is stressed so much as a survivor. Reporting, speaking out about what happened. And I think the fact that this book was mostly poetry, which I'm not a poet, I'm just curious if you think that poetry as a form of writing has, I guess, more the power of embodiment. I think poetry is an art form that really takes the intangible and makes it tangible in a way that even prose doesn't. So I would like to know, I guess, how your experience with poetry has shifted over the course of writing this book. And if you think that, I guess, how you think that poetry and sexual assault go together, I guess. It's a very vague question.
It's interesting because I am primarily a poet. And when I wrote the story, I thought there was just too much to put into a poem. But yet a lot of the poetry informed it because I talk about the bathing suit. I use a lot of imagery to talk about what's happening to me. I talk about, my dad and his lighter and his hands, because I want you to see that in his hands. I don't say, he can't talk to me. I want to create a visual. The bathing suit with the peephole, the chicken fights. I want you to see, and that's the poetry informing the story, which makes it easier. I think if I'm able to distill it down to images, I look for ways to soften the blow, if that makes sense. Like in myself, my poems start out very prosy, and then I start cutting and I find, oh, this image will work for that. So I think if using poetry as a therapeutic tool is what I'm think you're interested in, I think is great because sometimes we don't have the sentences to voice the trauma, and sometimes we don't want to share. So if I were to say to you, don't worry about creating a sentence, but when you're thinking about your trauma, what images come to mind? And maybe you can make a list of those images. And then I would say to you, okay, now let's work on the central image of all your list. And what comes to mind when you think about that specific image? And then maybe you'd have a list out of that. And you're just listing. You're not necessarily writing. It's like, I call it hot writing, just like free association writing. That sort of stuff, I think, does lend itself more to an idea of journaling that later can become a poem. And because really there are no rules in poetry, it can always be, I love spoken word for that, where you can do spoken word and have it be what it is in the moment, and that's it. It's done. It's over. It's not even written, right? It's so of the moment and of the body, because I believe that spoken word poets are very much in their bodies, and you can see it when they're spitting their rhymes in the way that they. The body is often an accompaniment to the words, and I think that lends itself to some sort of traumatic inquiry, if you will, in a creative form. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is like honestly blowing my mind because it is when we talk about sexual trauma, we often will tell, like when we're talking training law enforcement or like trauma, people, maybe won't remember things in a chronological way. They're remembering images. And I think trauma is glued to these images. And I'm like, dang, we're like really telling law enforcement to like ask people to write a poem. That's, you know, what we're training them to kind of look for instead of this prose narrative. And it's really.
And even like sound, like, you know, if you were shot, the sound of a gunshot or a car backfiring might forever, like PTSD with former vets, you know, they hear things that trigger them. Sound, smell. These are all aspects of figurative writing, of imagistic writing, which of course lends itself to poetry. Because also poetry is so condensed, right? Every word has to matter. Every word has to matter. So that also, if you aren't a writer per se, and you're looking for an outlet, it's okay if you don't have punctuation. It's okay if you're chopping up your sentences in half. It's okay. It's okay. And the idea too that, like, I'm a big fan of journaling when I do generative workshops, and not necessarily making people share, because you don't have to share and there shouldn't be pressure to share. Now, if you're like in the back and you really want to read, then please do share. But I never like, even for me, if I'm in a poetry workshop, I'm not I wrote a fantastic poem right now in 5 minutes. No, it's going to take a while. So I respect the silence. And sometimes when you're doing poetry or journaling that leads to that, there is a lot of silence until you figure out what it is exactly that you want to say. Yeah, I think that if cops, social workers, teachers, firefighters, everybody who comes in contact with people in not necessarily the best circumstances should take a lot of humanities courses. I mean, they should read literature. They should have empathy, and that's how you gain it. And it concerns me now, even more so now that we're in the COVID mode, right? And everything is through a screen, that we're missing out on empathy. And I wonder about the doctors who are training now, what they're going to be like when they're used to doing, telemedicine, which is a little different, right? So it's interesting. And that's why I would also say, at least for me, poetry, I love to write it down because it's such a mind-hand connection. And sometimes when you're writing, especially about trauma, things will happen that you never expected. It's just very powerful exercise. And you're free to share it at any time, even at LaFASA especially. If you write a letter to your inner child or to yourself using your left hand, it comes out looking very childish, the writing, because typically you're not left-hand dominant. And it's from your inner child to you. What the child you were wants the adult that you are to hear. And when I did the exercise, it was crazy because I didn't plan it. I was just writing. And it was really a reflection of how I felt as that girl. And because that opens you up too. It releases our expectations of writing, even down to our non-dominant hand. If you try it, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, I think she's there.
Kelly's a little frozen.
Yeah, Kelly's a little frozen. Any other questions? Or I will say that we do have an accompanying website, grabbedanthology.com. There's a blog where our contributors are asked questions and they answer. There's interviews. There are writing prompts, not poetry, just solely poetry. The lesson plan that I included. We have a lot of interactive things. And that, because what we hope too is that it isn't just about getting the book into your hands, but hopefully the book is going to lead you to a place of your own introspection, of your own. And even if, because some people, I had one person say to me, "Oh, but I was never sexually assaulted. I just used to get catcalled all the time." And I said, "And did you find a new way to get to work when you were catcalled?" And she goes, "Yeah." I go, "That's a violation, honey. They invaded your space. They made you feel unsafe to walk the fastest way to work. Why should you have to walk around the block?" And she was like, oh. So this, by extending it and making you think of things another way, that's why we have the website, so that you can, on your own time, think and explore and align yourself with whatever aspect of it that you need. Doesn't have to be that you were, raped or assaulted. It could just be that you know how to stick and move as a woman in the world. And don't we all know?
That's amazing. I'm so happy that you have that extension so that it goes beyond the book. Um, it adds to the experience and really makes an impact when adding those different elements. Well, does anybody else have anything that they would like to say, or?
Brittany, can I just tell you that you look just like an actress? Are you going to know what I'm going to tell you? Who? Did you ever see the show 6 Feet Under?
Yeah.
You look just like Claire.
The little with the round face.
The
Yeah. I see it
photographer and the
actually.
red hair. And I loved her. So that association has been fantastic.
Thank you. She's great. She's a great character.
Yeah, I was like, who does she remind me of? And I went, oh, Claire. I watch way too much TV, I admit. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your wonderful questions and your attention, and for making me feel like this book is doing its due in the world. And I just wanted to tell you guys that I did tell you in an email, but we're giving, as soon as we know what we've made, because I don't even know what we've made on the book. We made no money. Whatever money we do make, we are going to donate a portion of it to a charity, and LaFASA is our charity. So it might be $100. It might be, let's hope it's, $50,000, but whatever it is, and I don't know when it will be, but when it is, it's coming to you. So thank you so much for the work that you do. We value you and we honor your service. And thank you for having me.
So wonderful and generous of y'all to consider us in that aspect. And it's because it's for survivors. So
that's exactly right. And that's exactly what we wanted. That's exactly what we wanted. Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right.
And you know where to find me. I'll see y'all soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.